Okay, we are live.
We're live. All
Bel-
right.
First of all, apologies to all those who were listening for and saw a lot of dead space. It was apparently a little technical issue we had. The beauties of live television, so to speak. So I want to apologize to everybody. For those of you who are still around, thank you for sticking around, being patient with us. Obviously, we're going to get better at this for the next one, so not to worry. Uh, And just to let you know, these are going to be periodic. We're going to be having these multiple throughout the course of the year, talking to different guests, getting different insights on various topics that of course, we all are interested in. And at this time, I want to go ahead and first of all introduce myself because some of you may know me, some of you may not. My name is Senan Garcia. I'm an attorney. I practice in the areas of mergers and acquisitions, estate planning, probate, and tax controversy. And today's guest is going to be Brent Bardalis. He's with Rev Your Business, and I'm gonna just turn the floor over to Brent to introduce himself.
Sure. Thanks, Senan. Yeah. I've been in and out of various different companies. I've acquired, built, and sold companies across different verticals like medical, marketing agencies, manufacturing, distribution, and wholesale. And uh, and after exiting my most recent company, I said, what do I want to do for my next 10 years? And that was, help other companies do and achieve exactly what I've done in the past, which is scale and grow a company and ultimately realize a successful exit. So we do that through means of growth strategy, operational efficiency, and exit strategy. So I'm really excited for this conversation because I think it's gonna be a fun one.
No, absolutely. I think we both have a passion for this, and it's funny. I was having a conversation yesterday with with Michael, who you introduced me to, and we were having a great chat about businesses and a lot of the challenges that a lot of these businesses go through in terms
Sure.
of just meeting with someone like you, meeting with someone like me, and getting set up. And one of the biggest areas that I think start this problem is when a company starts to grow. And I'm sure that those of you that are listening or hearing this recording, you've probably, if you've been in a business, when you start up, it's easy. You're just putting things together, just making things work. But then it's that next phase. That next phase is where a lot of businesses tend to suffer because they grow, which is a good thing, but they grow sometimes so fast that things happen. And I guess you know there are issues on multiple fronts, from the business in terms of running it, to even some of the background legal stuff in terms of making sure you're structured properly. I guess, Brent, what have when you get into these deals, what do you see as far as that goes? When you see that growth coming in for a business, where do you fit in? What do you kind of handle when you, let's say, you have those clients come in and they're in that growth phase?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question, and I could probably talk for an entire hour on this alone. But from the growth perspective, every company's at a different phase in growth, right? So if you're kind of in the early phases, there's oftentimes just a lot of very small nuanced things that need to be fixed in order to even set yourself up for a proper growth phase. All the way down to minor systems, and if you have a sales team, just something as simple as a CRM system that you don't have, or KPI tracking, so you can make decisions based on data and not just based off of the which way the wind's blowing that day. But then if you start getting into the slightly larger companies, maybe in the middle market, you're going to talk about more technical or structured changes that need to happen from a structure standpoint. So you're going to really start looking into more of the leadership side of things, the operations, and looking into efficiencies to improve profitability, building out management teams or director level teams, or even as high as a C-suite or a advisory board, to help take the company over to the next level. So that's a loaded question. So coming into it, it really depends on the company itself and where they're at in the growth phase. But I'm sure this conversation is going to go places that I can give you a little bit more detail of an answer.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I see when I come into a business that's in a growth phase, for instance, I'm looking at it down the line. I never look at something right now, because right now is not what your sole focus on. And I'm sure you do the same thing. You're thinking 5, 10 years, you're thinking exit, when you're thinking about that growth. And you're trying to set them up for not only success in the business, but to structure them in such a way where by the time they come to that conclusion where it's time for me to walk away, it's time for me to, do something else, whatever that else is, you you put yourself in that structure where, okay, this is what you're going to be set up for. And for example, in law, one of the things we want to do is the basic things. And it's funny, it you a lot of businesses that are growing, there's a lot of things that, we in the industry, Brent and I, I'm sure, have dealt with this plenty of times, where you have a business where the simplest things aren't being done. It's, a lot of people think that we come in and we're doing this like massive amounts of restructuring, and we're doing a whole suite of, and then they think, oh, it's so expensive. It's like, honestly, a lot of times, especially myself, a lot of it is just simple, basic things that aren't there, that if they're there, it just creates a proper foundation. You know, I have some companies that they didn't even have a legal structure. They didn't set anything up, and it was just setting that up and putting the proper, internal documents, such as set of bylaws, operating agreement, contracts. But from there, when we can make sure the company's structured for success, and Brett, Brent, I'm sure you have looked at companies and saying, okay, how can we set up this company for future success? What can we do now that makes sure that the long-term goals, which are business succession, hopefully at one point, are put into place?
So yes, every engagement that I get involved in, it starts with the end in mind, because if you're thinking about an exit, and an exit doesn't mean you necessarily have to sell the company, right? That's just one version of an exit, build to sell. But you could have a situation where you might want to transition the company to family down the line, and then you would structure the company and the growth path very differently than if you're building it to sell. And even if you're it's a lifestyle play and you're just trying to cash flow it for a long time, and you plan on selling maybe in 30 years when you plan on retiring, and you want to keep this company forever, and that's your whole career, right? And so yes, we always approach it from that end. But where you come in, which is super important, is things as small as the corporate structure and the way that you and your partners have decision making capabilities, right? So if you want to sell your company, and you're my partner, and I don't want to sell because I'm just sitting back relaxing and collecting a paycheck every month, and you're like, hey man, I'm at a different point in my life, there's some reason why I want to sell. Well, I can't do that because you have decision making as well. So you need to make sure that obviously you're on the same page with your partner or partners, as far as what that growth plan looks like and what that exit plan looks like. That's just one of the many ways succession planning is so important, especially if you want to avoid discounts at the closing table, right? If you don't have any documentation, something as simple as SOPs for every level of the company, but including yourself, and a buyer comes in and you're not due diligence ready and you're not ready to transfer the company outward, well, you're gonna get hit with a massive discount. If you thought you were selling your company for X, well, now they're gonna that's a major risk for a buyer, right? And so now they're gonna chop that purchase price down as a result of that. And you know, if you want to keep kind of diving in to that part of the conversation, also who owns the relationships with the customers? Are you an owner operator, or do you have a management team that could succeed you, and the company continues to go and grow and operate without you? Or are you just a risk? If you leave, the buyer is going to lose half the revenue because you own all the and manage all the relationships with your clients or customers. That those are just some of the things that we have to look at and understand as we prepare a company for an exit. And oftentimes Well, ideally, I would like to come into the picture 3, 4, 5 years before you even think about exiting, so we could have all of these things in place. Otherwise, it may be too late.
That is, and I hope those that are listening pay to close attention to what Brent said. You don't want, one of the things I used to be a part of SCORE, and SCORE was, or is, I should say, an organization that focuses on helping small businesses grow. It's an arm of the SBA. I'm actually now elevated to an SBA resource partner. But one of the things that we talked about in SCORE that is still true to this day is you need to have those board of advisors. You need to have those people in place that you can talk to about your business. And you should have these people in your corner soon after you've determined that this business is viable. Once you've said, hey, I think there's something here, we really need to be put in a position of success. We need to actually go in, we need to actually, start having these conversations with these individuals, because you don't want to reach a point where, hey, you want to sell now, but there's so many messes to deal with. To Brent's point, you could be having a business that theoretically is valuable here, but because of all the internal structural problems that the new owner is going to basically inherit, they're only going to pay this much. You know, and Brent, you hit on a couple of points that I just found interesting, because, and I've seen this. I've seen it where some businesses have an agreement, but one person didn't review it. And there's this, position of, there's a clause, they call it the shotgun clause, where if I offer to buy your interest, automatically I say no, I'm buying the other one. So now you're putting the person in a position where no one can buy the other one out for fear that they'll lose out. And these are clauses that, you know, I have my own personal opinion on. Everyone is different. I find them to be counterproductive because it creates an animosity. I personally don't like them, but I know some people that do like them because they want to be able to just clear out problems. But there are other things to consider when you're dealing with ownership. You know, what happens if you both are decision makers and something happens untimely to one of your partners? You know, now we have an issue of, now we have no, we not only have a continuity issue, we have this person that just passed, but now we have people that are going to come over and take over this person's ownership who have no experience in the business. What that happens is it creates this gap, which could have a negative impact. And again, if you're looking to succession planning, some of you think about it, oh, well, let's assume you guys are healthy, but as let's say you have partners, you're growing old together, those chances become higher. And one of the things that we do, for example, is we include some estate planning work in the business, such as having a buy-sell agreement with a life insurance policy. Now, I don't do life insurance. I'm not selling life insurance, just for the record, people. I'm not here making any money off of it. I'm just an attorney in that regard. But I'm just saying these are some of the considerations that we take into account for individuals that come to us. We want to make sure that you have a structure in place so that there's seamlessness in terms of every situation that could develop. Because if not, what you end up happening is you could have internal strife. You could have a situation where, hey, one person's interested in selling, and let's say you have an LLC. LLCs at default are very difficult to sell your interest, especially of partners. So now, let's say one person is interested in selling. Let's say they had a casual conversation with the other individual, the other partner. That person says, "Oh, yeah, yeah, sure, why not?" Okay, nothing was official. It was maybe just a conversation they had in passing. That person reaches out to someone like Brent. "Hey, Brent, let's get this business set up for sale." And then that person comes around and says, "You know what? What are you doing?" And I go, "What do you mean? You said you were okay with this." "Well, I said we were okay. We were thinking about it." Now you have this problem where one person wants to sell, but the other one doesn't want to sell. And Brent here has procured a few buyers that are going to pay a lot of money, which that one partner's like, I'm ready to go. The other one's like, I don't want to sell and I don't want you to sell either. So these are conversations that need to happen early on. You have this understanding amongst the partners. Hey, this is what we want to do. This is how we want to set it up. Ideally, yes, we don't want to necessarily sell outside, but if we have to, these are the parameters and the conditions. And we both have to be on the same page. And I'm sure, Brent, you probably run into situations like that or more with individuals that are just, you're kind of coming into an internal family struggle in a business, so to speak, I guess.
I was just about to say it's no different than a marriage, right? So you start dating a girl, and before you guys get serious, you should probably have a conversation of whether you want kids or not at some point in your life, and then you guys start getting serious, and you're planning on getting married. You should probably have the conversation again before you get married. Do you still want to have kids? And if one wants kids and one doesn't, no different than if one wants to sell at some point in the next 5 years and the other person says, I never want to sell this thing. I want to hold on to this for the rest of my life. You guys probably aren't the right partners to be together. You may have many great, complementary skills and whatnot, but if you're not on the same page, it's only going to cause a problem later on. So treat it as if it's a marriage, because once you sign the contract, you're stuck, and it's very hard to get out of it. You're an attorney. You understand that very well. Once you're in it and money's on the line, it's very hard to get out. So have the conversation early. That's probably the best piece of advice you could get out of this conversation. If someone's listening that hasn't started a company yet and they're thinking about partnering, have the conversations of when you're ready to sell before you get into business.
Funny. I don't hear about it as much anymore, so hopefully word's gotten out. Um, but I run into this a lot where I I I have a partner comes into my office and they're having a little bit of a disagreement. And the first thing I say is, all right, well, let's look at it's an LLC, let's look at your operating agreement. Let's look at your shareholders agreement. Let's look at your bylaws. Let's look at your documents to see how we resolve this. And then their classic response is, what? What's that? What do you mean, what's that? It's like, well, I don't have anything. I mean, what do you mean you don't have like an agreement? It's no, no. I mean, we've been friends since we were kids, or it's my brother, that's my sister. We just handshaked everything, because that's how we're good. And I said, yeah, that's great for hobbies and going out to play and whatnot, but this is a business that's generating X number of dollars for you, that is basically covering and taking care of your family. This is not something that you want to hold on a handshake. You need to have things in writing. And I have so many examples and stories. I had one where that they had a business. It was great. Everything was running fine, but unfortunately, they didn't have any documents. And then one day, one of the partners was going through financial difficulties in his personal life. Person was going through, some issues. I don't want to get into specifics, but what ended up happening is they started to make decisions that benefited that individual and not what was in the best interest of the business. And then what do you have? Now you have this dispute. And this will have a negative impact on your business and its valuation. And if your goal is, I want to sell this business for a high valuation, you can't have somebody torpedoing the business simply to benefit their own person. You've built this up, you've worked at it, and there needs to be parameters, there needs to be structures in place that ensure that if certain conditions happen, we can take action. But right now, if you have nothing, there are no protections, there are no restrictions. And this becomes more of an issue. It's sensitive when you're dealing with family, because it's one thing with friends, you might be able to be like, okay, let's make this business, we have to. But then you have family involved, and you maybe have like you know, a father or a mother. And I've had a few of these. I've had family businesses, and they were all run in some way, shape, or form by the family. And sure, there was this understanding that the kids were going to take over, but then you have a problem because the kids start to want to take over, and then they realize that the father or the mother, they probably aren't doing the things they should be doing, and they're in some ways hampering the growth of the business, maybe because they don't want to lose control. And you coming in, you realize we could be generating a lot more money, but you're not doing what you should be doing. And maybe and this is respectful, maybe you as a kid is like, look, I don't want to be in this business that long. I want to take it over. I want to make x number of dollars and then walk away. And that's another factor to consider, because maybe these parents are quote unquote retired, but usually what they do is they stay on as like a board member. They might not have a lot of power anymore in a day to day, but they still have overall control. So these are conversations you want to have in succession planning that ensures that the parents know their role, the kids know their role, so that way you can do presuming you're the kids coming in, you can do what you need to do. And obviously, as the parents, you can recognize, hey, I need to step back, which is the hardest part. I mean, you know, and every parent who, if you're listening, you're a parent, I'm going to speak something that you all probably have experienced as a parent. Your kids are growing up, they're becoming more and more independent, but you'll always see them as your kids. You've been there for them through thick and thin. You've appreciated everything that they've learned, but at some point in time, every parent has the difficult part of letting go. And you have to let the business grow or let the kid grow so that they can be successful. And that includes them falling on their own and learning, because at one day you're not going to be there for them and they have to be able to handle things on their own. And the business is the same way. At some point you got to let go. You got to let go, let the business grow without you and be okay with it. And that's a big issue with a lot of family businesses. I don't know, Brent, what you've experienced with that.
Yeah, I mean, families and friends, it's usually it's a difficult one to navigate, right? Because they typically say don't do business with friends, and keep friends and business separate. But sometimes there's just a good opportunity for it. I've uh, I've seen them go wrong. I've had great experiences. I actually my first business started as a business with me and my father, and it was a phenomenal experience, and I had a lot of fun, and my best memories were with that. So there is a right way to do it, but everything was documented, and there were clear roles and responsibilities and expectations, so we could hold each other accountable. And that goes for both of us. Me as the son, I could hold him accountable, and vice versa. And so it worked out really, really well. And then I've also had businesses that were not as successful, and those were with friends. And after that, after the business isn't a success, the friendship's never the same. So to be cognizant of that fact, and when you do get into business, if it is with a friend or family, make sure that it's a friend or family member that you would be okay with the worst case scenario happening. And oftentimes the answer is, I value the friendship more, or the family member more than the potential to make a couple bucks. So usually I would advise against it.
Yeah, yeah. I won't lie. It is more often than not, you do find dealing with friends and family, it can be difficult. I sadly have seen many businesses fail because of the internal strifes of family. Now, does that mean that every single family business is a recipe for disaster? Absolutely not.
No.
To Brent's point, if you have it documented, you have an expectation, you have roles, and everybody respects the roles, it could be very successful. I know personally family businesses right now that are immensely successful and popular names. I mean, locally, a family-owned business that everybody knows is El Dorado. They've done well for years. They do well. They continue to function, and as new generations come in, the business continues. But there's an understanding, and it's two parts. It's not just documentation. There's a respect level for everybody. And that's so important when you're going to be working, whether it's with friends or with family. There needs to be documentation and there needs to be respect for those documents. Because when you sign those documents, these are legal documents. You are agreeing to this. And the last thing you want to do is have a situation where, hey, we could be putting ourselves in a liability situation if we start to disregard them. And that's the other big thing is your friends, that's great. Your family, that's great. But when you walk through that business door, you check those relationships at the door. You as soon as you walk in, it's getting to work and recognizing we have roles to play and respecting those roles. Sometimes we may fall asleep on that. Oh, well, we're friends. The other one will do it. And then you start to have it where one person's doing more of the work and then resentment starts to set in. And we don't want that. You want to maintain those separations. I don't know, Brent, if you were a Looney Tunes fan, but
Uh,
there was an old Looney Tune that it encompassed this, obviously in a kid's way, but it encompassed this. To me, there was a fox and a sheepdog, and the fox and the sheepdog were best friends. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. They were best friends. They would hang out. They would live together.
I wasn't a big Looney Tunes fan, but keep
Well,
going.
you
This
got
is
to watch it.
interesting.
You got to watch it. So they were friends. They lived together. They were they were the best pals. But then they had this huge obviously this is dating the scene. It was back in the 50s or whatnot, and this huge clock machine where you clocked in your time card, and they would
Uh,
both clock in. And the sheepdog went to go work protecting all the sheep, and the fox the wolf's job was to get the sheep, and they would go at each other basically killing each other to do their job. One wanted to take the sheep, the other wanted to protect the sheep. And you see this going on throughout the entire series of events. And as soon as the 5 o'clock whistle rang, they both beat up or whatnot, they clock out and immediately go from wanting to kill each other to the one putting the arm around each other. You're the best friend I all know. And they go home. But they recognize when you're at work, it's work. We got to do our job. And when we're at, out off the clock, we can be friends and do whatever. But we have to recognize that there's a different role. And I think that's important for any business that you go into. You want to make sure you have those internal relationships because it makes our jobs, Brent's, mine, your CPA, your banker's job much easier because it allows us to do our roles because everybody knows what they need to do. It allows those documents that we draft that you're gonna sign. It makes it easier because hey, I've got these parameters. When Brent gives you, hey, we got to do these things, you do them because you know that it's in the best interest of everybody. So having these relationships as your backbone allows us to do our foundational work to set up the company for success. And whether that's selling, successioning out to the next generation, whatever the course and the situation may be, it makes it that smoother. It makes it that easier. So I don't know if Brent, you've run into these issues as well.
of course, but that's also a great leadership uh, lesson as well.
Mhm.
You know, too often do you see, I mean, starting from the top, the founder, owner, CEO, what have you, they lead with an iron fist, and oftentimes that creates a lack of respect, and everything funnels down below that. And if your team doesn't respect you, then when it's outside of office hours, you're not going to have that relationship. And if you don't have that relationship with your team, um, they're not going to go above and beyond for you, but you want them to work like it's their own, and care for your business like it's their own. And so, with that being said, make it clear that business is business, and personal is personal. That you can create that friendship, that bond, between you and your team, whether you are sitting at the top or you're at some other level below that, some a managerial level or a director level, or whatnot. But make sure that you treat your team with hey, this is my role, I'm doing my job, and so I have to hold you accountable, but I can put my arm around you at the end of the day and walk to the car and say thank you, and ask what you're doing over the weekend. So that's a great. I'm going to look that one up on YouTube. I'm going to use that. I like that. I like that analogy.
Oh yeah, it's funny. I used to watch it as a kid, and now I see it differently now being on this side. I just thought it was a
Yeah,
cool
that's
thing.
great. That's
Now
great.
I see it differently. Leadership is so important because one of the biggest issues that can happen with leadership is that leadership will ultimately determine the value of the business as well because those people, that staff, rely on that leadership. The stronger and the better the leadership, the better that staff. And obviously, when we're talking about succession planning, if you're bringing on family members, you want to make sure that the staff and even the vendors and the customers will not only respect the new people coming in, but that they will have faith in the new people coming in. And that plays a huge role in transition. We want to make sure that we're transitioning to a leadership team that is going to provide operational continuity. And I'm sure, Brent, you want that as well for you to do your job because if you have that operational continuity, it allows for the work to be simpler, it allows for the work to be easier. You know, my job too, because I then know if you tell me, hey, listen, these buyers need to be in these particular situations, I can put that in the agreement as well because a lot of these owners, they've developed personal relationships in many ways with these employees. When they're bringing on somebody, to take over for them, they have expectations from the buyer. It's not just a monetary issue. There's also a personal issue. It's like, hey, you're going to come into my business. Granted, it's not going to be mine anymore. And yeah, you're paying me and I appreciate that, but I care about these people. So I need to know that you are going to be the right fit as well, because I want my staff, my soon to be former staff, taken care of. So
I could speak to that one. So actually, one of my previous companies that I sold, so when I was going through the process, the first question that I asked the prospect buyer was, uh, how do you run your business? It was a larger company coming to acquire me, and how do you run your business, and how do you treat your staff? And they kind of give me an overview of how they operate and whatnot, and they gave me a pretty good level of comfort that they're going to be able to take care of my staff the way that I take care of them, right? Because I truly care about them. And by the way, to this day, I still keep in touch with them, and we have a great relationship. The staff that was there. So we go through the process and all the lawyering and we get the deal done 8 or 9 months later. And now here comes the transition. And so I transitioned the company over. I make sure that the staff is well acquainted with the new leadership team and whatnot. And I stay on board for a short period of time. I leave, and I don't know, maybe a matter of 4 or 5 months later, I start getting calls from my former staff. Hey, Brent, these guys are pieces of crap and this that, and the other, and they're trying to lower my pay, and they don't care about us, and this that, and the other, and they're bringing these new people in and they're ruining everything, and I'm not able to service my clients anymore, and it just became a whole mess, right? And that's a good example of how bad, or how I shouldn't say how bad, but how important it is to make sure, if you truly care about your staff, to make sure that you vet the buyers as well as you possibly can. And if you truly care about your brand and the brand to succeed you for many years past the point of you being there, who buys the company is very, very important. That company ended up uh, not doing well. They ended up selling, like, the company ended up selling and exchanging hands like 2 more times. And anyway, it was an unfortunate situation, but that just goes to show how important it is to vet the buyer if you truly care about the succession of the company. Where in my case, it was for personal reasons I needed to sell, and so I did, and it ended up working out really well for me. But regrettably, the staff was not very happy within like 6 months of the transition. And if I can go back and change what I did, it would be putting together a better succession plan to make sure that the buyers could uphold the same care and quality of the staff that I did, because I developed real friendships, and I would go to staff's weddings and stuff like that. I was there for some of the most important moments of their life, and I cared about them. So that would have been something I would have done differently. It was one of the earlier companies that I sold, and I learned a lot through that process. And I've seen firsthand how things could go right, because I've sold other companies and it's done great things after I left. And that particular company unfortunately didn't work out very well for the buyers. So yeah, those are good points. I appreciate you bringing that up.
for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's a good time now, in light of that, to transition into some, I guess, pitfalls and I guess key points that any buyer or seller should consider when either trying getting to the point of transitioning, or even for a seller or even for a buyer wanting to come in. And obviously we just touched on one point, making sure there's a right synergy, making sure that this is the right fit for you, not just the business in terms of what they're selling, but the back end, the people, the structure. Obviously, as a seller, as a buyer, there's going to be changes. That's going to be obvious, and making sure that those changes won't have a drastic or negative impact on the business. Now, there's some other ones that I normally run into with clients, and that is first and foremost, how do we structure this? A lot of clients think, oh, we'll just sell the stock, if they're the ownership interest in the business and be done with it and keep it simple. And I say, well, I don't advise doing that, because if you do that as a buyer, you could be buying not just the assets, not just the business, but you could be buying the liability. Most business structured deals, it's an asset purchase deal. For those who don't know what that is, you're basically going in, you're buying the assets of the business. Now the assets, some of you may say, well, if I'm a service business, I don't have many assets. And truth be told, that's not true. Assets aren't limited to just tangible items. You have a lot of intangible items, customer lists, trade names, goodwill. These are items that the business has built upon and you want to take. But of course, any buyer doesn't want to take on the baggage, potential liabilities, internal stripes with employees that may have taken place. So one of the first pitfalls I've noticed, or I try and shy clients away from, is don't do, if you're a buyer, of course, don't do a ownership purchase where you're just switching yourself for the owner of the seller. Do an asset purchase, set up your own separate entity and buy it. Another one that I've run into is get your accounting in order. Now, obviously, I'm an attorney. Yes, I look at the legal aspects, but one of the things that I do is I recognize I'm not the only player involved in this and making sure this happens. One of the biggest problems that we find is that your finances aren't in order. And that creates a problem for the due diligence period when any buyer is going to come in and they see a mess. I had one client, I will tell you right now, I actually had a couple of clients that this happened, where they looked at the finances. One particular financial structure was they were coming in and they didn't have finance, or I'm sorry, they had the finances and it showed massive losses. And I said, and these are from the tax returns. I said, listen, I mean, legally, I can get this all done for you, but this company's bleeding money every day. I mean, why would you even spend this kind of money? Then the person says, oh, no, no, those aren't the real books. Those are just the books I report. This is and he pulls out this pencil written ledger that I could barely make sense of to show the company made all this money, but apparently he wasn't reporting all the income. And I tell my client, walk away right now. This is an IRS audit waiting to happen, along with the state of Florida with Department of Revenue, which they are even worse, by the way, than the IRS. This is something to walk away from. You want to have your books in order, and they should be reviewed by an accountant, a CPA, someone that has experience, because the last thing you want to have is that mess. I had another client that, they were coming in, they looked at the numbers, but the numbers weren't necessarily accurate. For lack of a better phrase. They painted this rosy picture, and then when you start to look into it, they mixed their and they didn't even know. Let's just be honest. Let's start from the beginning. And obviously, Brent, you can speak to this probably better than I. There's a concept called GAAP. It's known in the community, in the accounting community, as generally accepted accounting principles. They were hop skipping. In some aspects, they were following GAAP, and other actually they weren't following GAAP. And what it turns out is they had no idea what GAAP was. They were just doing what they needed to do, and it was a mess because we couldn't determine the true valuation of this business, because we basically were having a moving target constantly, and it created a scenario. Now, the third one that I just remembered right now was the numbers were okay. The business seemed decent. They had a good clientele. They had, all these assets, but we found out that there was an SBA loan, and the SBA loan, in essence, prevented them from selling without the approval of the SBA. So we had to do due diligence. We contacted the SBA, and what did the SBA tell us? Well, first they told us that they were in arrears. They were in default of the loans because they hadn't been paying the SBA loan. And on top of that, they weren't going to give the approval until the loan was paid off, which the person didn't explain to either myself or to the client. So my client was basically going to be buying a business they didn't have any authority to buy. And if they would have gone through with it, the SBA or the bank could have basically taken all the assets for themselves as far as a collection. So it is so important that you do your due diligence. It's so important that you get your numbers. And I see, Brent, you are itching. So I know you have something to say about this.
Yeah, I've just been taking notes as you were talking because I have so many things to hit on here, and how important this is. I'm going to go back to the first thing you were talking about, and when you're acquiring, if a buyer is buying something, they would be buying typically an asset sale, right? They'd be buying the assets of a company, not the stock, or assets and goodwill, and that's a very, very important distinction, especially as a buyer, just to avoid liability. But there are certain cases that you would have to buy the stock. And I'll give you an example because I actually went through this when I sold my medical company. There was no other way for the buyer to buy my company other than to buy the assets and the stock, because a lot of the value that I was selling was the contracts that I owned, or that I was contracted with all the insurance payers. Like for instance, in Miami, in the medical imaging business, there all of the panels are closed with the insurance payers. So if you wanted to start a medical imaging company, you couldn't go out and just get a contract with them and start seeing their patients and get reimbursed by the insurance company. You have to buy an existing EIN. And so in that case, it was a very rare scenario, but I had to sell the asset and the stock of the company. And then someone like yourself would come in and make sure that the buyer is protected against any future liability, and I would assume all the liability of any of the if anything were to arise. Of course, nothing happened because we operated above board. But the point is that's a very rare scenario. But most of the time, if you're buying something, take Sennin's advice, buy the assets, leave the stock, and set up your own entity that's a clean slate with no liability. So that was just a comment there. As far as having your finances in order, that's what you just gave examples of, those messy companies and whatnot. That's a great example of why you should be planning your exit far in advance of when you actually are ready to put the company on the market and sell, and make sure that your due diligence ready. That is a perfect example of how to make a deal fall apart, or how to experience a massive discount, and you're not going to be able to get the value you want out of your company. And if I just kind of start listing off some of the things that you should be paying attention to if you're actually planning for an exit, and especially as you start getting closer, you're going to want a quality of earnings report, and build trust with your buyers. You're going to want to do some comprehensive forecasting, make sure the consistency of your margins are in order, and you don't have some months that you're operating on 70% gross profit margins, and another month you're operating on 42% gross profit margins. That is just not a reliable business, and that's going to be a big red flag for a buyer. Supplier concentration risk, customer concentration risk, strengths of your contracts. Talk to Sennin about this. If you're in a business and you have clients that are on some sort of a retainer or contract, make sure the contracts are not outdated. Make sure those contracts are strong, and they're all of your clients that are paying you every month are actually contracted to pay you every month. Because if there is a situation where a client decides to not pay you and you don't have a piece of paper that says that they're obligated to pay you, well, that's a risk for the buyer, because now the business could go elsewhere when you leave. I talked about ownership of the customer relationships before, but super important. What intellectual property do you have? Do you have all the proper documentation for that IP? I can go on and on, but the point is there's so many things, especially from the financial side, that you want to make sure that you are ready for, and you've done your due diligence, and you are due diligence ready. So when you are ready to go to market, you have a big, beautiful package of documents that when someone signs their LOI, you could just deliver, and you have everything there. Every transaction inside and out. You know why every dollar is going in and out of your company, and you minimize the potential discounts at the end of the day. And last but not least, GAAP financials, super important. And if you don't know what GAAP financials are, I'm not going to talk too much about them right now, but just shoot me an email or a message or something. Go on my website, revyourbusiness.com, fill out the contact form, call me, whatever. I'll make an introduction to someone. Senan could probably make an introduction to someone that could help you get your company, your financials, GAAP compliant, and especially if you're looking to go out and raise money or sell the company, that's going to be very important to provide some transparency to a potential buyer or lender. So yeah, GAAP financials are super, super important.
So one other point I want to make, and it's something that I do because obviously when you're doing an asset purchase, one of the sometimes issues may come up that those assets are encumbered, and you're not made aware of the encumbered asset. The seller, and we could play it safe and say the seller forgot or didn't realize. One of the things we always like to do is we have a little side money that from the sale that we set aside for a period of usually anywhere from 60 to 90 days. And if there are no issues that come up in that time period, then the money is released to the seller and we move on. And these are just things to protect the buyer. Obviously, from the seller's side, we obviously want to make sure that the buyer has the funds. You don't want to basically go through all this due diligence, spend all this time, energy, and money, and then find out, oh, well, he really didn't have the money to pay. And now they want to do some kind of owner finance thing, which of course you weren't expecting as a seller, unless of course that's something you were okay with from the beginning. That could create a problem. So I don't want to put you in a position. I don't want anyone here to be in the scenario where you're not from the get-go making sure you have all your ducks in a row and you're protected. So it's important to run through all these situations. And just one last point before we get into the final meat of the of our session here today. To Brent's point, sometimes you do have to do a purchase of the entity. I actually did have one business where we had to, because there were licenses that were attached to the EIN, the tax ID of the company. And unfortunately, we could open up the new one, but we couldn't transfer those licenses. Those licenses were connected to that particular business. So in that particular instance, we had to do a very sensitive structure, and that money set aside, we really couldn't do that. We actually had to set up some kind of a liability insurance scenario that the seller was willing to pay for a certain period of time, so that if anything did come up, that insurance would kick in. Now, obviously, that's not a normal scenario. That's a unique situation based on the circumstances, but that was something we were able to do for that particular client. So, obviously, we've reached the end or close to the end of our journey today, so to speak. And I thank all of you who have stuck around. I thank all of you that got through our little issue that we had at the beginning. But at this point, and I tell you right now, I'm kind of figuring this out a little bit, but I want to see if we can open the floor to any questions that you may have. Those of you listening, if you're here, if you have any questions on anything we've talked about, is there something else that we haven't? Obviously, this is your chance. I'm going to see if there's a way we can list your questions so that we can see exactly how we can help. And one of the other things that I would also like is if there are any specific topics that you want to be discussed on one of these LinkedIn Live sessions, let us know as well. I mean, this is obviously going to be a benefit to the community. So if it's something that you want to hear more about, I'm happy to do that. So let's go ahead. All right, so I appreciate that. I'm glad you're enjoying it. And obviously want to continue to provide great content. So again, if you have any questions, let us know. If there's something you want to see, let us know. We want to make sure that we're always staying above and providing that valuable information. So, and I appreciate the positive comments. Will not say no to them.
I actually received a few messages throughout the discussion, and they're like, "All right, technical difficulties. Where do I find you?" And I'm sending a link to the LinkedIn Live. So hopefully everybody was able to get their way back in.
By the way, if for those of you who know of people that maybe logged off, we can definitely. We'll have a recording. We'll post this live. I'll post this live session, obviously recorded for those of you to listen in. So obviously, we'll make sure that happens.
All right, here's a question.
we could definitely do a session on seller financing. I don't think that's going to be a problem. I'll make sure we get somebody on for one of our sessions to talk about seller financing. I know we have a few people or at least people that I know that would probably be interested in that, or who have knowledge in that. So we can definitely set that up for sure.
Awesome. I have a quick question for you before we wrap up. Would
All
love
right.
to hear your thoughts on equity rollover, and some of the pros and cons of that.
Well, my make sure I'm understanding equity, because my understanding of equity rollover is we're transitioning from someone, the equity rollover that I'm familiar with, we're rolling it over to another, generation. We're moving it
In the
from
event
that.
of a sale, so in the event of a sale, so I don't know, let's say you own 100% of a company, buyer comes in, some private equity firm, and they're like, hey, we'll purchase, we'll purchase, we'll purchase the company, we'll pay you out 80%, the other 20% will be retained in our entity, and then you'll have the option to sell in 5 years, or whenever we exit out of our endeavor, and you can get for lack of a better term, a second bite of the apple. And I would like to hear your thoughts on what a seller may want to keep in consideration if, in the event they are selling a company, and the buyer, oftentimes when it's a larger sale, you're selling to private equity, they're going to want you to keep some skin in the game and roll over some equity into their entity. And what should a buyer or seller be on the lookout for if that were the event of their situation?
It's funny, I actually do a lot of those deals with real estate. It's usually the buyer wants it's usually I'm sorry, it's usually a requirement of the seller. The seller actually wants to maintain ownership in those scenarios, because it's usually the buyer coming in. They're the developer. They want to come in. They want to basically do whatever they need to do on the property, and the seller wants to get some proceeds from obviously that continued business.
Mhm.
A lot of it depends on this is and it's a great point. This is if it's not real estate, obviously, if it's a non-real
Mhm.
estate type business, I think there's a little bit more risk on the seller's part. But this goes back to how confident you are in your business, how confident you are in the brand that you've built. If you believe that your brand is that high, then you should have no problem. I mean, a lot of the clients that I deal with that are sellers anyway, they're confident in their business. They're just tired. They really don't have the energy anymore to move forward. And they just want to move, or they're bored and they just want to move on to something else. So it has nothing to do with their belief in their business. It's more just their interest in their business has waned. So I don't see in that situation, if you feel confident in what you've built, then that shouldn't be that big of a deal. Now, obviously, the concerns that you have are legal, in the sense that you want to make sure of, okay, if I'm going to maintain 20%, you're going to pay me the 80% amount. You know, when am I going to get my dividends, my distributions? How are those going to be paid out? If you decide to sell, you know, am I forced to sell? Maybe you as let's use a scenario. A private equity firm comes in and they massively increase the revenue. And you got to the point where you've gotten used to those revenue streams. You don't want to sell. Are you going to be forced to sell? And that goes into the devil in the details of the contract. Maybe you're put in a position where you have restricted ownership, where, yeah, you have ownership for so long as the buyers, have ownership. And that could be a problem, because maybe the PE companies are only planning on being here for 5 years and they're going to sell. It means you're going to have to sell too. So those are some considerations you have to have on the seller side. Now, obviously, on the buyer side, if you do this, again, this would be a situation where the seller wants to stay on, usually, and that's probably because they see a huge benefit from the buyer coming in and either improving something, or they already have plans that they already see for the business. You as a seller, as a buyer, now you have to be wary of the fact that this ownership of this seller, whether it's usually it's like anywhere from 5 to, as Brent mentioned, 20%. This is usually the problem where now they have to have this, I don't know, this albatross around their neck, where they may not be able to sell when they want to, because maybe the new buyer wants 100%, and now this person doesn't want to sell. Again, it goes back to restricting the ownership and the structure, where, hey, we don't want this person. You're not going to be able to sell or buy or whatnot unless we buy or sell. If we're going to walk away, you're going to have to walk away with us. And maybe those sellers are like, we don't want to. So this could be a potential sticking point depending on the business and depending on the position of where the seller is. I think the seller is going to be more amenable if they're, kind of want to relax. They want to have a nice revenue stream. They've got structures in place, which speaks to a bigger question as to what are their finances outside of the business, because you want to make sure that their finances are in such a way where this amount is going to not be their begin all end all in their finances.
Yeah, and that I think is the biggest point is if whatever the deal may be, that 20% that you're leaving in there, if all works out great, then maybe somewhere down the line that 20% will be worth more than it was when you sold the company, and it worked out awesome. But if the company ends up going belly up and you don't get that 20%, that 80% when you sold should be enough to make you feel good about the transaction, and you won't have any regrets by leaving that 20% on the table. I think that's becoming more and more prevalent in deals these days, especially with private equity. And I think one thing that a seller needs to keep in mind is exactly that. I actually got that advice from a good friend of mine, and he recently sold out about a year and a half ago. And he said, if for whatever reason I never got that 20%, I feel good about that 80% that I did get, and it was more than fair. And everything I worked for, I'm happy with that 80%. And if I get the extra 20%, it's going to be icing on the cake. So if you feel that way, sign the dotted line. But if you're not going to feel that way, don't agree.
Agree. 100%. All right. Well, I think this was a great conversation. I definitely had fun.
Me too.
I know
Thank
that a
you.
lot of you are. No, I loved it. I wouldn't mind bringing you back, Brent, for another discussion. I think it went well, aside from the little earlier glitches we had. But I thought the conversation was awesome. I had a lot of fun. I don't
Agreed.
want to keep. Yeah, so I don't want to keep anybody else here longer. We had budgeted for close to an hour, and we're right around there. Um, so let's see. We do have one final question. Apologies. I would love to hear more about specific agreements and contract templates for M&A. Well, I don't want to get into too much because we're about to wrap up, but the type of agreements that you want to have obviously vary on the deal. So there's no one size fits all. Obviously, like Brent and I discussed, you want to default to maybe an asset purchase, but there could be exceptions to that. So that's something where you always want to listen in. I mean, one of the big takeaways that we hope you've gotten from today's session is the importance of having that team on your side. You want to have someone like Brent. You want to have someone like myself there in your corner, making sure that you're ready for success. You don't want to go at this alone, because what could end up happening is you could get suckered in where someone throws at you a lot of money. Then when they start doing their due diligence to realize you've got a mess, and then they drop their price. So I wouldn't focus so much on the agreements, but more so on your team. And the team will ultimately determine what agreements you need, because you could have a situation where your main agreement is the purchase agreement, and then you could have other sub agreements, such as employment agreements to keep that team that's currently in place, meaning you as an owner, there for transition. Or the new buyer may say, no, I don't want you involved at all. I want you out because I need to make sure that those customers don't see you anymore, because they're going to think that you're still here, and then it's going to create a problem. So all of that really ultimately depends on the deal itself. What are you seeking to structure? And if you have any questions on the specific agreements, you have any questions on what needs done for your business, give Brent, give myself a call. We'll be happy to talk to you about what are the things that you need to have for your business to set you up for success. I think that's the most important way of going about it. I don't know if Brett, you wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, I actually have a resource on my website. It's free. If you go to revyourbusiness.com and you go to the exit strategy planning solutions page, you'll see a link to the exit readiness assessment. It takes like 10 minutes to complete. It's a bunch of yes or no questions, and once you finish it, you'll get a reply from me, and I'll be able to run through and help you kind of navigate through that stuff. We could spend 30 minutes on the phone. It costs nothing. And most of the time, that sort of a conversation, we'll tie Senate into the conversation as well, because there's a lot of legal processes that are needed when being exit ready. So yeah, again, revyourbusiness.com, go to the exit strategy planning page, and you'll see the exit readiness assessment there. It takes 10 minutes to fill out.
There you go. I mean, can't beat that. So, for those listening, and of course, if you want to speak to either of us offline and get more details, we're of course available. Just give us a call, or you can email. You can email me, Senate at sgarcialaw.com. Also, of course, you can visit our website, sgarcialaw.com, and you can find all our contact information there for our firm. Obviously, Brent, you have his revyourbusiness.com. So we can definitely answer any questions that you may have regarding your particular business and what you want to do. So, again, I want to thank Brent for being here today. I want to thank all of you for listening in, and for those that listen to the recordings, of course, thank you for listening to the recording. And again, if you have any questions, we're here to provide that advice, and we will hopefully see you soon with our next session. We'll be marketing that soon. We're just finalizing some details on that one as far as our new guest. So once we have that finalized, we will definitely send that out. And until then, I hope all of you have a great rest of your Thursday. And since it is Thursday, I hope you have a great weekend, and happy St. Patrick's Day for Monday.
Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate you having me.
All right, everybody.
All right. Take care.